It was a bright, chilly morning. The kind that made the breath visible in little clouds and made everyone pull their jackets tighter. The city square was already filling up with people, some hurrying to work, others walking lazily, enjoying the small weekend market that had set up between the old buildings. In the middle of the square stood a piano, polished but old, with a few scratches that told stories of years of use. It was a fixture of the place, but no one paid much attention. People passed by, occasionally tossing a coin into the small open case at its side if they happened to notice a musician playing. But today, the piano was waiting for someone special, though no one knew it yet. A figure appeared at the edge of the square. The person moved slowly, almost hesitantly, carrying a small bag that looked worn and heavy. Their clothes were plain, slightly frayed at the edges, shoes scuffed from long use. They paused for a moment, taking in the scene, their eyes scanning the crowd that was beginning to gather near the piano. Some people were curious, others were clearly amused. A few snickers could be heard, soft but unmistakable, as if the very sight of this ordinary figure approaching the grand piano was a joke. No one knew what would happen, but the anticipation was quietly mocking. The figure took a deep breath and stepped closer. Hands trembling just a little, they rested them gently on the piano's edge. The warmth of the wood contrasting with the cold air, the crowd's attention sharpened immediately. Some whispered to each other, pointing subtly, sharing their amusement. "Who is this?" One person murmured. "Looks like they're going to mess up," said another. A few children tilted their heads, curious but sensing the tension around them. The figure didn't seem to notice the judgmental eyes or the smirks. Instead, they adjusted the bag on their shoulder, then carefully opened it, and took out a small, slightly worn sheet of music. The papers were fragile, edges curled, with markings that suggested hours, maybe years, of practice. The performer moved toward the piano with a quiet determination that went unnoticed by most. They settled onto the bench, sitting upright but without arrogance. Just a calm focus that contrasted sharply with the whispers around them. The crowd's amusement shifted slightly, turning into impatience. Some leaned back, crossing arms, while others pulled out their phones, half in anticipation of a funny moment, half out of curiosity. The performer glanced at the sheet music, then at the keys, taking another slow, deliberate breath. The cold air made their fingers stiff for a moment, but they shook it off, letting their hands rest lightly on the keys. Then, with a small nod to themselves, they pressed a single key. The note rang out, clear but soft, not forceful or showy. It was just a beginning, almost humble, but it was enough to catch a few off guard. The crowd shifted. A few snickers were replaced by confused looks. The simple note had a strange resonance, filling a small space in the air that felt larger than the square itself. The performer's eyes closed briefly, letting themselves feel the sound, the air, the quiet stir of attention. Another note followed, then another, simple at first, deliberate, careful. No rush, no grand gesture. Just the honest start of a story told in music. As the performer continued, the crowd began to notice small details. The way their fingers moved, precise but relaxed. The subtle rise and fall of their hands, the way they seemed to speak to the piano as if it were an old friend. The initial smirks on some faces were fading, replaced by a curiosity that they couldn't hide. People shifted closer, drawn in despite themselves. The children stopped fidgeting, leaning forward to see how someone who looked so ordinary could create such clear and gentle sounds. Even those who had come, expecting a funny display, were caught, their eyes fixed, their breathing slowing unconsciously. The performer didn't rush. Every note seemed to be measured, chosen carefully. They weren't trying to impress with speed or showmanship. Instead, there was a quiet honesty that started to weave its way through the crowd. Passers-by, who had been walking quickly, stopped for a moment. Drawn by the music, the unexpected calm and beauty in the middle of a busy square. Some put down their bags, some leaned on benches, and a few simply stood still. Letting the sound reach them, the performer's focus was absolute. They seemed to disappear into the music, their surroundings fading away. No longer aware of the smirks or whispers, they let the piano speak for them. letting every note carry a small part of their story. The sheet music was a guide, but the true story came from within. Each chord, each careful movement of the hands told of long nights alone in small rooms, of struggle, of determination that no one had witnessed before. There were hints of sadness, hope, and quiet strength. The kind of emotion that doesn't shout but gently asks to be noticed. The crowd was changing. What began as amusement was now curiosity, and curiosity was quietly turning into admiration. People who had whispered to each other moments ago were now silent, listening intently. The performer's backstory, though unknown, began to form in their minds through the music. They imagined years of practice in solitude, small victories over mistakes, a love for the piano that went unnoticed by anyone else. The music spoke louder than words ever could. The smirks that had followed the performer were gone, replaced by eyes that widened, brows that lifted, and quiet nods of appreciation. And yet the performer seemed oblivious to the shift in the crowd. Their attention was entirely on the piano, on the story they were telling with each note. There was a moment when the fingers hovered above the keys, a pause that felt long, but it wasn't hesitation, it was intention. Every pause had meaning. Every breath taken before striking a key added weight to the story. And when the first small passage ended, the silence that followed wasn't awkward or uncomfortable. It was full, heavy with anticipation, as if the square itself was holding its breath. Waiting for the next chapter to begin? Some people whispered quietly among themselves. Who is this? Where did they come from? But no one spoke above a murmur. The sound of the piano had taken over, and suddenly, the performer's ordinary appearance no longer mattered. The old worn clothes, the frayed shoes, the quiet movements, all of it faded into irrelevance. What mattered was what they were creating right in front of everyone's eyes and ears. It was a subtle, almost magical transformation. The square that had been filled with laughter and judgment now held only attention and quiet awe. The performer leaned forward slightly, eyes still closed, fingers poised. There was a careful balance in their movements, a mix of delicacy and confidence. The notes that followed built slowly, carefully layering melody upon melody. Each sound seemed to find its own space in the air, weaving through the crowd, touching ears and hearts alike. The music was no longer just sound, it had become a living presence in the square. A quiet force that shifted the energy of everyone who heard it. Even the harshest critics in the crowd couldn't help but feel the change. People who had been ready to record the moment for laughter now lowered their phones, captivated. The performer's hands danced across the keys with purpose, but without exaggeration, and the music carried a story that everyone seemed to understand without words. It was a story of patience, resilience, and quiet courage. And as the first part of the piece reached its conclusion, the performer's eyes slowly opened. They looked around, not for approval or recognition, but as if checking to see if the music had reached its destination. And indeed it had. The square was silent, full of people who had been changed without realizing it. The smirks were gone, replaced by faces that now carried a quiet respect, a silent acknowledgement that they had witnessed something rare and extraordinary. The performer rose from the bench, adjusting their bag and taking a small step back. No applause yet, no sudden cheers, just a collective breath held, a pause in time. The story had begun, but everyone knew there was more to come. The music had opened a door, and the crowd could feel that behind it lay a journey that would continue to surprise, to inspire, and to transform. The ordinary figure who had walked into the square quietly, unnoticed, had already begun to rewrite the expectations of everyone present, and as they prepared to continue, the sense of wonder, anticipation, and quiet awe lingered. Waiting for the next note to carry it even further, the performer sat back down on the piano bench, taking another careful breath. The square had grown quieter now, the earlier snickers and whispers replaced with a low, expectant silence. People moved closer, drawn by curiosity and a sense that something unusual was about to happen. The sun reflected off the polished keys, highlighting the performer's hands as they hovered above them, waiting for the right moment to start again. For a brief moment, doubt seemed to hang in the air. The crowd wasn't entirely sure what to expect next. Some thought the music might fade into something ordinary, just a few more notes before the performer stumbled and the spell broke. Others wondered if the first part had just been a lucky touch, a fluke that wouldn't continue. Yet, there was also a sense that this was different, something that couldn't easily be judged or predicted. The performer, calm and focused, seemed to sense it too. They closed their eyes for a moment, as if tuning themselves to the invisible rhythm of the square. The first chord of this new piece was different from the one before. It carried a weight, a quiet strength that immediately caught attention. The performer pressed the keys gently at first, letting the sound fill the air before building gradually. It wasn't loud, but it was firm, deliberate, and carried emotion that could not be ignored. The crowd's heads tilted, some eyebrows lifted, as the notes moved in unexpected directions. There was a subtle sadness in the melody, but also a spark of hope. As if the music itself was telling a story of struggle and resilience, people began to notice little details about the performer that they hadn't before. The slight trembling of the hands at the start, the careful posture, the way the fingers moved with both control and sensitivity. It was clear this was not a casual player, not someone trying for attention or applause. Every movement was purposeful, every note chosen with care. Some members of the crowd leaned closer, unable to resist the pull of the music. Children, who had been restless moments ago, now stood still, eyes wide, captivated. Even the people who had laughed quietly at first found themselves drawn in, faces changing as the music began to tell a story they hadn't expected to hear. As the performer continued, the music grew more complex. Simple melodies intertwined with richer chords, creating layers of sound that felt alive. There was a rhythm that matched the heartbeat of the square itself, slow and steady at times, quickening in moments of intensity. The performer's fingers moved with confidence. Yet every note seemed to carry a piece of their own experience, a history that no one in the crowd could see, but everyone could feel. The whispers of doubt began to fade entirely. Even those who had been preparing to record a funny moment now held their phones at their sides, captivated. It wasn't just the skill that drew them in, it was the honesty of it, the human element that shone through every note. The performer wasn't showing off or trying to impress. They were sharing a part of themselves, quietly and openly. Without any expectation of reward or recognition, a few spectators exchanged glances almost in disbelief. The ordinary figure they had dismissed now commanded the square's attention effortlessly. There was no need for dramatic gestures, no exaggerated expression, no theatrics. The music itself spoke more clearly than any words ever could. It told of countless hours spent alone with a piano, of patience and persistence that went unseen, of small victories and quiet defeats. It carried the weight of real human experience, and the crowd, consciously or unconsciously, recognized it. The performer's eyes remained closed for much of the piece, but every now and then they glanced briefly at the sheet music. The papers were worn, edges curled from frequent handling, marks and notes scribbled in pencil showing the hours of practice that had gone into each line. Yet the music wasn't just being followed, it was lived. The performer responded to it, shaping it with subtle nuances, bending the sound to reflect emotion rather than perfection. It was a delicate balance, one that only someone deeply connected to the instrument could achieve. The air in the square seemed to shift as the piece progressed. People who had been talking quietly now fell completely silent, their attention absorbed. The sounds of footsteps and distant traffic faded into the background, as if the music had created a bubble around the piano. Passers-by stopped and lingered, some leaning against nearby walls or street lamps, others crouching slightly to get a better view. The performer, oblivious to the growing crowd, continued with unwavering focus. Their presence calm but commanding. As the middle section of the piece unfolded, the music took on a more personal tone. There were moments of hesitation, small pauses that felt like breaths, moments that spoke of uncertainty and fear. But each pause was met with resolve, the next note coming stronger, more determined. The performer's hands danced across the keys, moving seamlessly from gentle, delicate passages to bold, confident chords. The emotion in the music deepened, resonating with something inside every listener. The sadness was tempered by hope, the struggle by perseverance, the quiet by strength. A few people in the crowd were visibly moved. Eyes glistened with tears, lips parted in awe. The performer's music had bypassed intellect and gone straight to the heart, touching emotions that had nothing to do with skill or showmanship. Some remembered their own struggles, their own moments of doubt and perseverance. Others simply felt a sense of wonder, the kind that comes from witnessing something rare and real. The performer did not seek these reactions, yet they were unavoidable. Carried naturally by the honesty and intensity of the performance, the piece slowly built toward a gentle climax, each note contributing to a larger picture. The audience leaned in, silent, as if afraid to break the spell. Even those who had come expecting entertainment or distraction now felt a deep respect forming, a recognition of the performer's dedication and talent. Every smile, every whisper of amusement had vanished, replaced by quiet contemplation and amazement. The ordinary figure at the piano had become extraordinary, not through bravado or show, but through the simple act of sharing themselves through music, and then, as if sensing the right moment, the performer allowed the music to soften, to taper off into a series of tender, lingering notes. The square was filled with a delicate silence, heavier than the noise before, richer and more meaningful. The performer's hands rested lightly on the keys, eyes closed, a small, satisfied smile playing across their face. The audience waited, unsure if applause should break the spell, unsure if words could ever capture what they had just experienced. One by one, the crowd began to stir, but no one spoke immediately. The silence itself seemed sacred, as if the music had created a pause in the flow of everyday life. People exchanged glances, some nodding subtly, others simply looking down, lost in thought. The performer had done more than play notes. They had created a space for reflection, for emotion, for connection. It was as if the music had spoken directly to each person's heart, bypassing judgment, expectation, and preconception. Finally, a faint clap began from the edge of the crowd. It was quiet at first, hesitant, unsure, but it quickly grew, spreading through the square, building into a warm, genuine applause. The performer looked up, eyes meeting the faces of the crowd briefly, acknowledging the response without breaking the calm focus that had carried them this far. There were smiles, nods, and quiet murmurs of appreciation, all mingling with the fading echoes of the piano. The ordinary figure who had arrived unnoticed, laughed at by some, had transformed the space entirely. The audience had come expecting entertainment, perhaps a laugh or a brief diversion, but they had received something far more powerful, a reminder of the depth of human expression and the quiet strength that can exist in unexpected places. As the applause settled into a steady hum, the performers stood and packed up their sheet music carefully. They moved with a grace that was subtle, almost invisible, yet it carried the weight of someone who had dedicated their life to this craft. The crowd began to disperse slowly, some lingering longer, reluctant to leave the moment behind. Children whispered to their parents, adults shared quiet observations, and even the busiest of passers-by seemed reluctant to move on. The performer had done more than play a piano, they had changed the way everyone present saw the ordinary and the extraordinary, the quiet and the powerful, the underestimated and the remarkable. As the performer walked away, the square slowly returned to its normal rhythm. But the memory of those notes lingered in the minds of those who had heard them. People carried the sense of awe, the realization that what they thought they knew about someone or about life could be challenged in a single moment. The performer, ordinary in appearance, but extraordinary in talent and heart, had begun a journey that would continue to surprise, inspire, and captivate. And the crowd, unknowingly changed, had witnessed a story unfolding that went far beyond music. Into the realm of shared human experience and quiet transformation, the performer returned to the piano once more. Sliding the bench closer with quiet familiarity, the crowd, which had begun to disperse after the last applause, now gathered again. Some drawn by curiosity, others by the memory of the music they had just heard. There was an energy in the air, a subtle tension, as if everyone knew that what was about to happen would be different from before. The performer's calm presence commanded attention, though no one shouted, no one pushed. Yet everyone felt the need to pause, to wait, and to witness. The first notes began softly, almost like a whisper, delicate and uncertain. They spoke of hesitation, of moments when confidence wavers, yet beneath the surface was a quiet strength. The music moved slowly at first, each note carefully placed, as if testing the waters. The performers' fingers were light on the keys, yet every sound carried meaning. People leaned forward instinctively, drawn into the narrative unfolding without words. Some closed their eyes, letting the melody wash over them, while others watched the hands move in quiet fascination. This part of the performance was different. It was more intricate, more complex. The music seemed to mirror life itself, full of unexpected twists and turns, moments of fragility and bursts of energy. The performer shifted between delicate passages and stronger chords, a blending emotion and technique in a way that felt effortless yet deliberate. Each note seemed to breathe, to exist on its own, and yet it was part of a larger story that everyone in the square could feel but none could put into words. The crowd's reaction was subtle at first. Eyes widened, hands unconsciously tightened around belongings, and some leaned on nearby benches or walls for support. The children, who had been quiet and attentive, whispered softly to their parents, their voices barely audible. Even those who had come with friends to watch casually were now completely absorbed, caught between awe and disbelief. The performer's presence was quiet, unassuming, yet magnetic, pulling everyone into a shared experience. As the melody grew, a gentle tension built within it, creating a sense of anticipation. It was no longer just music. It was a story of struggle, hope, and triumph being told in sound. Each chord seemed to carry emotion that went beyond skill or practice. It carried life itself. The audience, initially skeptical and ready to judge, now hung on every note, feeling the music resonate within them. People exchanged glances, smiles forming quietly as the realization settled in. This was more than a performance. It was an experience, a moment that demanded attention and reflection. The performers' movements were fluid, almost conversational with the piano. There was a rhythm, a push and pull that mimicked human emotion. Moments of hesitation were followed by bold, decisive passages, as if the music itself was learning, growing, and responding to an invisible dialogue. The crowd felt it instinctively, responding not with words but with silence, their attention deepening with every measure. The atmosphere was charged yet calm, a rare combination that made time feel slower, more deliberate and more meaningful. There were small, almost imperceptible changes in the crowd. A man who had been leaning against a wall shifted slightly forward, his eyes fixed on the performer. A young woman's hands, previously folded, relaxed as she breathed more freely. Children stopped fidgeting completely, mesmerized. Even those who had been doubtful moments ago now seemed entranced, caught in a shared human connection that was impossible to ignore. The performer, seemingly unaware of the transformation happening around them, continued to play with quiet determination. The middle section of the piece introduced a new depth. The music took on a narrative quality, telling stories of personal struggle, small victories, of moments of loneliness, and the strength required to overcome them. The performer's fingers moved with precision, each note placed with care, yet there was a warmth, a humanity in every movement. The crowd could feel it, sensing the story without needing words. There was a universal truth in the music that resonated with each listener in a different but equally profound way. Some members of the audience were visibly affected. Eyes glistened with emotion, lips parted as if trying to form words, and yet no one spoke. The music filled the silence with something more powerful than conversation. The performer's expression remained calm, focused, yet their body language conveyed subtle intensity. The hands moving effortlessly across the keys were extensions of thought and feeling, translating inner experience into sound. Every pause, every gentle touch, every sudden burst of energy told a story that everyone understood instinctively. The dynamics of the piece shifted again, moving from soft, intimate passages to bold, commanding chords. The music seemed to expand, filling every corner of the square, touching ears and hearts alike. People who had been standing at the edges now moved closer, drawn into the gravitational pull of the sound. Even those passing by paused, captivated, sensing the extraordinary in the ordinary. The performer's energy was quiet but undeniable, a force that reshaped the environment without effort or noise. The audience became more than spectators. They became participants in the unfolding story. They listened with intent, their emotions subtly mirrored in the ebb and flow of the music. There was a shared rhythm between performer and crowd, a silent understanding that this was a rare moment, a fleeting yet unforgettable experience. The ordinary figure at the piano had created an extraordinary connection, one that transcended expectation, judgment, and routine. As the piece progressed toward its climax, the music carried a sense of inevitability. Each note, each chord was a step toward something greater, a culmination of emotion and skill intertwined. The performer's focus never wavered, yet the subtle shifts in posture, the rise and fall of the hands, and the delicate control of dynamics communicated an intensity that words could not capture. The crowd, fully absorbed, felt the power of the moment in their own ways. Some with quiet awe, others with a sense of recognition, and a few with tears threatening to escape unnoticed. The final passages of the piece were a delicate dance between restraint and expression. The music reached heights of emotional resonance that few could anticipate, yet it never felt forced or artificial. Every note was earned, every pause intentional. The performer's dedication, their unseen hours of practice, their love for the instrument and the craft was evident in every movement. The crowd, initially skeptical and judgmental, now experienced a collective realization. They had witnessed something rare, something transformative, something that challenged their assumptions about ordinary people and hidden talent. As the last chord faded, the square held its breath once more. The performer's hands rested lightly on the keys, their eyes closing briefly as if acknowledging the journey just completed. The silence that followed was deep and resonant, a shared pause that allowed the audience to absorb the experience fully. No one spoke, no one moved for a long moment, each person lost in their own reflection, their own understanding of what they had just witnessed. The ordinary figure who had walked quietly into the square had become a storyteller, a guide through an emotional landscape painted in sound. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the audience began to react. A soft clap here, a quiet murmur there, but no overwhelming noise. It was as if everyone understood that this was not the time for loud applause, but for acknowledgement and reverence. The performer, aware yet unassuming, nodded slightly, recognizing the connection without seeking attention or praise. They packed their sheet music carefully, each movement measured and respectful, and prepared to stand once more. The crowd, still silent but deeply moved, continued to watch, sensing that more of the story was yet to unfold. The performer's journey through this part of the piece had transformed the atmosphere entirely. The initial doubts, the smirks, the whispered judgments all had vanished. What remained was respect, curiosity, and a profound sense of human connection. The music had shifted perception, had altered expectations, and had created a shared experience that would linger in the hearts and minds of everyone present. As the performer stepped back, the square seemed to hold on to the echoes of the notes, the invisible threads of emotion, and the realization that they had witnessed something extraordinary. The story was far from over, and everyone present could feel it. The performer returned to the piano with quiet determination. The crowd, which had begun to relax after the previous section, now leaned forward with anticipation, sensing that this part of the performance would reveal even more. There was no rush, no dramatic flourish. Instead, the performer settled into the bench as if reuniting with an old friend. The air was still, the usual noises of the city fading into the background, replaced by a tension that was both calming and electrifying. The first notes were gentle, almost hesitant, like a soft conversation meant to invite rather than demand attention. Yet within them was a depth that could not be ignored. The melody flowed smoothly, weaving through the square, touching ears and hearts alike. Each note seemed to carry a subtle story, whisper of emotion that began to connect with the audience in ways they could feel but not yet understand. The performers' fingers moved with precision, yet there was warmth, a human quality that made every sound resonate with authenticity. As the music progressed, the complexity increased. The performers shifted between soft, delicate passages and stronger, more confident chords. The transitions were seamless, as if the music were breathing, expanding and contracting with life. The crowd responded instinctively. Some closed their eyes, letting the melody carry them. Others watched, fascinated by the movement of the hands and the quiet intensity in the performer's face. The children remained still, wide-eyed, sensing the magic in the moment, while adults leaned forward. Caught between awe and disbelief, there were moments of silence within the piece, carefully placed pauses that created tension and anticipation. These silences were not empty. They were full of meaning, of unspoken emotion. The performer's hands hovered above the keys, poised and patient, as if listening for the right moment to continue. The audience, attuned to every subtle shift, held its collective breath. In those moments, it felt as though time itself had slowed, and the square existed only for the music and the performer. The melody began to rise, building layers of harmony that intertwined with each other. The music conveyed a range of emotions: joy, sorrow, hope, and determination without a single word being spoken. The performer's focus never wavered, yet every subtle gesture of the hands, the slight tilt of the head, the gentle movement of the shoulders, communicated intention and feeling. The audience could feel the performer's journey, the dedication and struggle that had led to this moment. It was as if each note were a reflection of countless hours of practice, of quiet nights spent alone, of perseverance that had gone unnoticed until now. The crowd, initially skeptical, had transformed completely. Smirks and whispered jokes had vanished, replaced by silence, attention, and a growing sense of respect. People shifted slightly, moving closer to hear better, their eyes fixed on the performer's hands. A few clutched their chests, as if feeling the music physically. The performer, unaware of the effect, continued to play with quiet intensity, letting the melody guide the emotions of everyone present. As the performance reached its emotional core, the music became more intricate and demanding. The performer's fingers moved with skill and elegance, navigating complex passages that rose and fell like waves. The energy of the piece was palpable, resonating with a sense of triumph over adversity, a quiet celebration of resilience in human spirit. The crowd felt it in their bones, in the slow tears forming in eyes, in the tightening of lips, in the unspoken acknowledgement of witnessing something extraordinary. The middle section of this part introduced subtle variations in rhythm and dynamics. The performer experimented with tempo, speeding up and slowing down, creating tension and release that mirrored the unpredictability of life. The melody shifted seamlessly between melancholy and joy, between fragility and strength. Each note was deliberate, each chord intentional, yet the music flowed effortlessly, as if it were an extension of the performer's own heartbeat. The audience responded, unconsciously synchronizing with the rhythm. Leaning forward, swaying slightly, absorbed by the story unfolding, there were glimpses of personal history in the performance. The music hinted at struggles, quiet victories, moments of doubt and courage. The performer's hands, while technically perfect, conveyed emotion with subtle imperfections, the slight hesitation before a chord, the gentle emphasis on certain notes that revealed a human story behind the skill. The audience, attuned to these nuances, felt connected not only to the music, but to the performer themselves. It was a shared journey, a silent understanding that transcended words. The dynamics of the piece continued to evolve. Soft, intimate passages alternated with powerful, commanding chords. The music rose and fell like waves, carrying the audience along, immersing them in a narrative that was both personal and universal. The performer's expression remained calm, focused, yet there was a quiet intensity that spoke of dedication and passion. The audience, initially hesitant, was now fully engaged. Moved by the authenticity of the performance, as the piece approached its climax, the music swelled, filling the square with sound that was both grand and intimate. The performer's fingers flew across the keys with precision, yet each note carried emotion that touched the hearts of everyone present. The audience could feel the struggle, the triumph, and the vulnerability conveyed through the music. Some held back tears, others whispered to themselves, unable to articulate the depth of feeling. The performer, lost in the music, seemed unaware of the growing emotional impact. Yet it was palpable to all. The final section of this part was a delicate interplay of melody and harmony, each note carefully chosen to convey resolution and hope. The music softened gradually, returning to a gentle, intimate tone, yet the emotional weight remained. The performer's hands rested lightly on the keys, drawing out the final notes with care, allowing them to linger in the air. The silence that followed was profound, filled with the resonance of what had just been shared. The crowd, holding its breath, felt the full weight of the performance, a collective understanding that they had witnessed something rare and transformative. Slowly, the audience began to respond. A few soft claps emerged, hesitant at first, then growing steadily. The performer stood, acknowledging the crowd with a quiet nod, yet remaining humble, unassuming, and focused. The applause spread, growing into a warm, genuine recognition of the skill, dedication, and emotion that had been displayed. People exchanged glances, some smiling, others with eyes glistening, all sharing a silent acknowledgement of the extraordinary experience they had witnessed. The performer gathered their sheet music carefully, taking one last glance at the piano as if saying goodbye. The crowd, still lingering, seemed reluctant to break the spell. The square, once filled with casual passers-by and whispered judgments, had transformed into a space of reflection, admiration, and quiet connection. The ordinary figure at the piano had shifted perception entirely, proving that talent and emotion could emerge from unexpected places, and that the human spirit could be expressed in ways that words alone could never capture. As the performer walked away, the echoes of the final notes lingered in the square, creating a moment that would stay with everyone present. People began to move, gradually returning to their routines, but the memory of the performance remained vivid. The music had changed them, even if only subtly, reminding them of the power of persistence, humility, and authentic expression. The performer, ordinary in appearance, but extraordinary in heart and talent, had left an indelible mark. The square would never feel quite the same again. The performer walked slowly away from the piano, their steps measured and calm. The crowd, still lingering, seemed reluctant to break the spell that had been created. People whispered quietly to one another, sharing their amazement, each word carrying a mixture of awe and disbelief. The ordinary figure who had entered the square so quietly had completely transformed the space, turning skepticism into admiration, doubt into respect. The memory of the music lingered in the air, wrapping around every listener, leaving a sensation that could not easily be forgotten. Some in the crowd sat down on nearby benches, heads resting in hands as if trying to process what they had witnessed. Others simply stood, still rooted to the spot, eyes following the performer as they disappeared into the streets beyond the square. Even those who had only passed by on their way to work or errands paused, turning their heads to catch a last glimpse of the figure who had commanded their attention without a word. Without showiness, without any demand for recognition, the city resumed its rhythm slowly. Footsteps returned to their normal pace, conversations resumed, and the distant sounds of traffic drifted back into awareness. Yet for those who had witnessed the performance, a subtle change had taken place. A quiet respect had settled in their hearts, a gentle reminder that talent and depth could exist in places and people they had never considered. The smirks, the laughter, the whispers of doubt, they were gone, replaced by an understanding that first impressions could be misleading, and that human potential often goes unnoticed, until it is revealed in moments of courage and authenticity. In the days that followed, people spoke quietly of what had happened in the square. Friends told friends, neighbors shared stories of the performance, and even those who had not been present felt its echo through the words of others. The memory of the music persisted, lingering in conversations, in reflections. In fleeting moments when someone would pause and recall the depth of emotion, skill, and the honesty they had witnessed, the performer became a quiet legend in the city, known not for fame or publicity, but for the transformation their music had brought to those who had heard it. The performer, meanwhile, continued their life with the same quiet focus that had defined them all along. There was no grand celebration, no interviews, no pursuit of recognition. The act of playing, of expressing themselves honestly through the piano, was reward enough. Yet they carried a sense of fulfillment that came from knowing that they had reached hearts. The music had spoken where words could not. Each time they returned to the piano, each note they played was a continuation of that story, a new opportunity to share, to connect, and to remind others of the extraordinary. Potential hidden within the ordinary, the people who had gathered in the square that day found themselves changed in subtle ways. Some took time to notice small acts of kindness or skill in those around them, remembering how easily they had misjudged the performer. Others felt inspired to pursue their own passions, reassured that dedication and authenticity could create moments of lasting impact. Children who had watched the performance carefully returned to their own explorations with a sense of wonder, a reminder that magic could be found in unexpected places and that effort and patience often led to remarkable outcomes. Even weeks later, those who had been present remembered the performer's quiet demeanor, the way they had approached the piano, the way the music had flowed naturally yet powerfully. People who had initially been skeptical reflected on the lessons learned, realizing that the value of someone's talent could not be measured by appearances or preconceptions. The story of the performance became part of the city's memory, a tale of how a single act of courage, skill, and authenticity could shift perspectives,